Today is the 1st of May. It's 47 degrees out. It's going to be a beautiful day, and we're going to get back to this auction find John Deere B. In the last video I managed to get it running on its own fuel, but it wasn't running right. It kept surging like it was hunting for fuel or something of that nature. So I had to go back to the basics of a gasoline engine. What are the things a gasoline engine needs to run? Well, we need fuel, air, and spark, right? But we also need compression and timing. If any of those things are off, it's either not going to run at all or it's not going to run right. So I know I've got spark because the tractor will run. I've used my spark tester on the spark plug wires, and we got a nice hot spark. On the last video we put a new rotor in there. I also installed a new set of points and a new condenser. So we've got spark, we can check that off the list. I wondered for a while if our issue was ignition timing, like maybe the timing gear wasn't aligned properly, but I don't think that's what was going on, because the tractor seemed to want to start pretty easily, and then when it did run, it sounded pretty good, except for the fact that it was hunting for fuel and surging. It was not missing or popping like they normally do when the timing is off. So I don't think it was the timing. Since the last video, I've also checked the compression on both cylinders. The service manual says this motor should have about 70 psi, and I got about 62 on each cylinder, keeping in mind that my compression gauge always seems to read a little bit low. So based on that, I'd say we've got somewhere between 62 and 70 psi on both cylinders, which is excellent. So I know it's not compression. We can cross that off the list. So that brings us to air. I had the air intake elbow off here, and I made sure it was clear and free of blockages. I also cleared out a wasp nest in the top of the stack here. But I did try running the tractor both with the air system attached to the carburetor and with this elbow removed from the carburetor, getting just fresh air from the atmosphere. And it ran the same whether the air intake system was hooked to the carburetor or not. So we can cross air off the list. So what we're left with is fuel. And that has kind of been my suspicion all along. In fact, I ended up having to take the carburetor off 4 different times to check all the passageways, to make sure the float was adjusted right, to make sure that there was nothing wrong with the carburetor. And it seemed like I had everything clean and clear, but it still would not run right. In the last video, I even tried a different fuel source to eliminate the fuel tank from the equation, but that had no effect either. So I keep ending up back at the carburetor. You might notice that this carburetor is freshly painted John Deere green, and in the last video it was just painted black. Well, this is a completely different carburetor. I broke down and bought a rebuilt carburetor and traded my old one in for the core exchange. And I was kind of taking a chance with this rebuilt carburetor, because although all the indicators were pointing to a carburetor issue, I still wasn't 100% certain that was a problem. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger. I'm super impressed with it. The guy did a great job. It looks nice. It's set up properly, and more importantly, it works correctly, and the tractor runs well now. So I either missed something in my cleaning process with the old carburetor, or something else was wrong with it internally that was beyond me. Whatever it was, that was the cause of the tractor surging and not running right. Also, the throttle slant governor control rod was way out of adjustment, so that wasn't helping the situation, but it was not the primary cause of the surging. So I got that adjusted properly also, as per the manual. So we'll jump right in and I'll show you how I did that, and then I'll fire up the tractor. And I think you'll agree once you hear it that the tractor seems to run quite well now. All right, so now let's talk about the throttle slant governor control rod and how the manual says it should be adjusted. Back here, right there, is where it pivots on the shaft that goes to the governor. And up front, of course, it goes into the mechanism that controls the throttle butterfly. So let's pop it out of there. And then the manual says to move the throttle lever all the way forward. And then with the throttle butterfly open like this, it says the end of this rod here should be 1/2 of a hole short on this side like it is. But right now it's an entire length of the width of this rod plus a little bit. So we want to adjust it this way, so then when it comes to rest like this, it's overlapping the hole in the throttle butterfly control by 1/2. So I'm going to remove it from this end and take it off the tractor, and I'll show you how to adjust it. So I need to loosen this lock nut, and we need to lengthen the rod, so I'm going to spin this out. I'm not going to tighten this down yet. Let's go back to the tractor and see how it fits. So you can see we made some progress. We've adjusted it this way, and it's actually over the hole now a little bit, but we want to go a little bit more until half of it is covering that hole. So let's go do it again. All right, that looks pretty good to me. We're going to go with that. So in order to drop it in the hole, you just pull it forward a little bit and drop it in. But when it's outside the hole, it overlaps by about 1/2. All right, let's give this a go. We got the rebuilt carburetor, we adjusted the governor throttle control rod, and hopefully this will do the trick. All right, now let's change the oil. See that water coming out? Oh boy. This poor tractor has just been completely neglected. Well, this oil filter housing is stuck. I can't get it off, so I'm going to use this tool that I don't use very often this vice grip chain and see if I can remember how to do it. Wrap it around round object. Now I think we've got a grip on it at least. Oh man. There we go. Man, she's really stuck. There. All right. Got it. This is the filter itself. All right, I've got these two wing nut fasteners loosened, and we need to remove the crankcase breather here. The breather itself is clear, but we got some, looks like some yellow jackets in there. And a very dirty filter. All right, I've got a new seal here. It goes up here into this groove. Okay, new filters going in. Try that. All right, put the plug back in. This right here is a valve for draining coolant. Just because I was curious, I removed the plug and opened the valve and had a nice free flow of coolant coming out of there. So I wasn't sure what that was before, but now we know. So I've got the crankcase breather filter element cleaned, or at least much cleaner than it was. And now we're going to add oil. The service manual says it takes 7.5 quarts of oil. So we're going to start, you know, with that ballpark figure. And down here, this is the oil check valve. I have this cracked open, so when oil starts coming out of here, we know we have enough. This motor is going to absolutely love this fresh oil. Get rid of that old thin stuff that was in there. All right, she's starting to come out of the check plug there. I think I put in about 7 quarts, so we'll call that good. Last time I had it running, I heard some squeaking up here somewhere and made sure it wasn't the belt that was making the noise. So I'm going to take this plug out right here and shoot some grease down into the fan shaft, because I'm guessing that's probably where it's coming from. Now I'm going to start it up again, see how she does with the new oil, just make sure we still have oil pressure. And if everything looks good, I'm going to leave it running for a while and see if we can get it up to operating temperature for the first time. Well, it sounds to me like it's the generator that's squeaking after all. There's no change to the fan up there, but I think the noise is coming from this. So I'm just going to disconnect the fan belt. Well, that squeaking, grinding noise was definitely coming from the generator. See if you can hear this. It sounds like it's scratching something inside, but down the road, just for fun, we can crack that open and see what it looks like. But I'd be surprised if we're going to be able to save that. For all you non-John Deere folks out there, the cooling fan, the radiator fan, runs off a shaft, because the engine is back here, right? It's not like a normal engine where the engine is up front, pretty close to the radiator, and typically the fan would run off a pulley with a belt off the crankshaft. But because this runs off a shaft connected to the drive from the motor, the fan is always spinning when the motor is running. So the only reason we have a belt on here is just to run the generator. So I'm just going to leave the belt off because the generator isn't working anyway, and we don't want that god-awful grinding, squeaking noise. And we still get cooling because the fan runs off that shaft. I was getting a pretty good oil pressure. It was, I'd say, 3/4 of the way between the L and the M. And the water temperature gauge never registered. And I remember that same thing happened on that 1943 John Deere B I had. The only time I could get it to register, the only time I could get it to come up in temperature, is when I would put the tractor under load. I drove this around for 30 minutes, and just, you know, driving it was not enough to increase the temperature. The most I ever saw the temperature get to on the cylinder heads near the spark plugs was about 150 degrees, which is a very cool running engine compared to just about anything else. But I think that's pretty typical for these to run 150 or 160 until you get them under load. Then they're going to run, you know, 190 or so. Well, I thought dragging the trailer around for 30 minutes would be enough to increase the temperature, but the tractor didn't care it was there at all. If you missed the first video, I pointed out that this tractor still has the original radiator shutters, which is really cool. It also still has the linkage rod and the knob up here on the dash for opening and closing the radiator shutters, but somewhere up in here is disconnected. So when we get the hood off in the future, I'll try to fix that. And this might be the only tractor I own at the moment that does not leak oil. That spot right there is just a drip from the compression valve. But as you can see, there's no other drips from the bottom of the engine or anywhere by the transmission or rear end. I'm very happy with the rebuilt carburetor. It seems to work great. I was able to adjust the mix on both the load and the idle, and I think the tractor is running like it should now. It's not surging anymore. It's got good throttle response. The coolant system is holding coolant, but we do have a bulging hose down there. It's sort of wet on the bottom of it, but it's not dripping anymore like it was. And the upper radiator hose is in bad condition also. We'll put those on the list of things to purchase and replace. We also need to check the oil in the transmission rear end, because I haven't looked at that at all yet. It appears that the air intake system and the stack are clear. I don't think there's any blockages in there because I've got it hooked up to the carburetor and it seems to be running pretty well. If you remember from the first video, this front tank is full of old kerosene or something, and there's a bunch of sludge in there and it's completely clogged up. So at some point we're going to have to take off the hood and see if we can save this front tank. But luckily the back tank is clean and clear. So there's still a lot left to do, but I'm happy with the progress we're making so far. This is pretty much a operating tractor again, so I feel good about that. The tires and the wheels are in terrible condition, and I haven't showed you guys those yet. That will be for another day. We'll probably have to replace both rear rims and both rear tires. But overall, I'm happy with where we're at. I think we did okay at that auction after all, and I don't have a ton of money into it yet, so that's good. Remember from the last video, I was having trouble getting low range to engage, but it works perfectly now. High range and low range, everything works. Thanks everybody for watching. Appreciate the support. Hope to see you on the next video, and we'll keep going on this old girl. Take care, everybody.